Well, good evening. I just want to invite all of you to come on in and take your seats and come join us. So before we get started, I often am reminded that the land that we are occupying was once the land of indigenous peoples who occupied this land before us. And let us pay homage to those people who were here, and let this be the beginning of how we understand the people who occupied this land and what they sacrificed so that we could be here today. I just want to say on behalf of the Kansas Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution at Bethel College, I just want to extend the warmest welcome. It has been so long, too long, since we have been able to be in person. And as a matter of fact, it was nearly 2 years ago when we had our last in-person peace lecture. And as you're aware, many of us have been in front of screens watching much content, and we've been able to have peace lectures that have been on a Zoom screen. But to be able to interact with someone in person as they give their lecture is, I think, a missed opportunity that we've had. We've not had that opportunity to connect with each other in those ways, that human connection. There's not really a replacement for that. And so even in the ways that we might be intimate tonight, the engagement that we have is precious. And there are so many ways that obviously before the beginning of 2020, we took so much of that for granted. That even in seeing a few and seeing your faces, even with masks on, it feels so good and special. And I'm honored to have each of you here, because when you come in person, you're making a choice. And it's a courageous choice. And we are grateful to have you here. So one of the things that we talk about often who we want to bring here, who we want to have, whose words do we want to hear right now. And when we were sitting trying to figure out in this climate, in this time, who do we want to bring to campus, it was unanimously put out there about Mark McCormick coming, and everyone on our staff was overjoyed at the prospect of him coming. Mark has been an ally, a friend, a person who has shown up for us on many occasions for KIPCOR and for Bethel College. And so we are grateful to have him here. And when I arrived at Bethel, I had heard things about Mark McCormick. Mark McCormick did this, Mark McCormick said that, or Mark McCormick wrote this. And I did not get the opportunity to meet him before he moved away to Kansas City. But I had the opportunity to meet him. It was probably 2 or 3 summers ago. We were at a gathering for, I believe it was for the Kansas Health Foundation. And Mark came up to me and introduced himself, and I think we maybe had 15 or 20 minutes to talk. But I was so excited to get to meet him. And so the funny thing about Mark is he came and did an event at KIPCOR that I wasn't able to be at. So I got 5 minutes with him there. So I think, Mark, maybe counting the time that we chatted downstairs, maybe we've been in the company of one another for about an hour. And good time it has been. So grateful to have you here in person. So with that, I want to invite our student worker, Lindsay Bonenstill. She's going to come up and give her welcome from Bethel College students.
Hello and welcome to tonight's Peace Lecture. I personally am so glad we are able to be in person and do it safely this year. We would like to, sorry, I just lost where I was going. But I'm a junior social work major here at Bethel, and I also, like Cheryl said, work as a student assistant here at KIPCOR. On behalf of the Bethel College students, we would like to formally welcome you to our campus. I hope your experience has been memorable and KIPCOR has been able to give you insight of Bethel's charm. We are so happy to have you here and are looking forward to hearing your stance on peace. Your 20 years of experience of being a columnist is fascinating, and I personally am excited for this opportunity to hear you speak. Your notable achievements of being a New York Times best-selling author and previously working for the executive director at the Kansas African American Museum in Wichita, and now being a part of the American Civil Liberties Union, to give us a broader horizon and new ideas here to Bethel. We thank you for taking time to come to North Newton and speak with us here in Mem Hall, which has a lot of history itself, and you are now a part of that history, which is also notable. I would like to invite the Bethel College Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Milliman, to present his remarks.
Welcome to Bethel College. Welcome Mark McCormick. Welcome all of you to Bethel College. We are, as most of you know, a private liberal arts undergraduate college affiliated with Mennonite Church USA and accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. At Bethel College, we strive to welcome all people to our campus, where we prize individuals for their unique personalities, talents, and life experiences. This year, the diverse student body includes students who come from Canelones, Catalonia, England, Lima, Madrid, Miranda, Panama, Port of Spain, Santiago, Sao Paulo, Montevideo, and North Rhine-Westphalia, just to name a few. The majority of our students, of course, are from Kansas, and there is typically a large number of students from surrounding states such as Oklahoma, Colorado, and a significant number from Texas. As faculty and staff, we hope to contribute to the lives of these students in meaningful ways. For example, our priority is teaching students not just through educating minds, but also by walking alongside these students as they recognize transferable work and life skills that occur in the classroom, on the court, or on the stage. Participation in the classroom and extracurricular activities in athletics, music, forensics, student government, and theater are avenues where students excel at Bethel College. Plus, these activities give opportunities for relationship building. This aspect of a college education contributes to student success as faculty and staff mentor students to find their way on their path following graduation. In conclusion, the Bethel College vision statement sums it up best. Bethel College graduates students to increase human flourishing, or shalom, in society by owning and enacting their faith, demonstrating compassion for the powerless, engaging in critical thought, and bringing value to the workplace. This is our hope for a Bethel College student. That is the goal for a fresher. Now I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our host, for she has not introduced herself. Cheryl Wilson, Executive Director of the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Cheryl holds a Master of Liberal Studies with a focus in restorative justice from the University of Minnesota, the Twin Cities. That's my alma mater as well, so go Gophers. She began working as KIPCOR Executive Director in 2017 and has more than 15 years experience working in restorative justice. Cheryl is a talented, resourceful practitioner, trainer, educator, researcher, and writer. We are pleased, we are more than pleased, we are thrilled that Cheryl has chosen to be part of KIPCOR at Bethel College, and particularly because she's brought Mark McCormick with us this evening. Cheryl, the podium is yours.
So, when we asked Leonard Pitts to be our spring peace lecturer this last, at the beginning of the year, we were trying to figure out who could introduce Leonard Pitts. And it just became unanimous once again because Mark did such a fabulous job when Leonard was in person. We all agreed that he should be the one to introduce him when we did this virtually last spring. So, as a result, we thought it only fair that we ask Leonard Pitts to introduce Mark tonight. So, because of the wonderful technology we have, we're able to have Mr. Pitts share a fabulous introduction about Mark. And so I will go ahead and get us to that right now.
I met Mark McCormick for the first time years ago when I traveled to Wichita to speak at some function or another. I no longer remember what function it was. I have no idea what year it was, but it was long enough ago that he had dark hair and I had hair. So we're talking years and years. What I remember is that he wanted to talk to me about writing columns, which at that point I had been doing for a few years, and I think he had just started doing. And here I should point out that writing columns for a living is a very weird thing to do. There is a reason that we are told at social gatherings that we should stick to discussing the weather, no politics or religion. Expressing an opinion on any subject of importance, and indeed sometimes on subjects of utter triviality, is an inherently divisive act. It makes blood pressures and tempers rise. Well, a columnist takes this thing that we are taught not to do and not only does it, but does it on page and screen, does it for the record before thousands or millions of people. He makes people mad. He makes some happy too, don't get me wrong. But the point is he does it repeatedly, once a week, twice a week, or more. And as if that weren't tricky enough, he is also expected to do it with consistent quality, to somehow fit a complex argument, a novel observation, a fresh insight into 600 or 700 words or so, and to make those words flow like water, dance like Baryshnikov, and sing like the Temptations. And to keep doing it on deadline, mind you, week after week, after month, after month, after year, after year. That's something nobody teaches you. It's something you learn pretty much by doing it. And then when you add the whole black thing on top of it, when you feel that your calling as a columnist is sometimes to dive deep into the thorny conundrums and grinding frustrations of race in America. When you try to find some truth to tell, knowing that a certain cohort of your audience would rather eat glass than hear that truth, well, the job becomes more difficult still. What I'm trying to say is that it's not an easy thing to do well, and that Mark did it exceptionally well. You don't have to take my word for that. You may take the word of the Kansas City Press Club, which showered him with gold medals, or take the word of the Wichita Business and Professional Women, who made him their Man of the Year, or take the word of his readers, who learned and grew from his insights. The thing about being a columnist, or at least a good one, is that it allows you no room to hide whoever and whatever you are. Whatever it is that is in you comes out of you. You can't fake it when you sit down in front of that blank screen. The blank screen has no patience for lies. So Mark filled his blank screen, and thus the pages of the Wichita Eagle, with who he is, a man of generous soul, with a passion for the trials of the little guy or gal, an impatience for hypocrisies and moral compromises, an ear for those who too often go unheard, and a moral compass that pointed true north. You went away feeling as if you were a better person for having read him. Mark stopped committing journalism a few years back, but I have no doubt those traits have followed him into his subsequent adventures at the Kansas City African American Museum. As I said, the blank screen does not change who you are, it just gives you a platform to display it. I eagerly accepted the offer to introduce him today, in large part because he has performed that function for me on more occasions than I can count. He has always been so eloquent and bountiful with his praise that I usually came to the stage, as Martin Luther King once said, wondering just who the heck he was talking about. Well, now I am so pleased to be able to return the favor. I ask you to welcome a colleague, a friend, and a good man. I am better for knowing him, and I think that you will be too. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark McCormick.
I don't think you all understand how much it means to me to have Leonard Pitts introduce me. You know, when we were talking downstairs about an hour ago, we were talking about me having met Muhammad Ali when I worked in Louisville. I spent an afternoon at Muhammad Ali's mother's home while he entertained a little kid that he had frightened during a school visit. Muhammad Ali actually baked the kid a cake, did a magic show for them. I was mesmerized. Leonard Pitts, to me, is the epitome of the columnist that I always wanted to be. I am so full now, I don't even have to make a speech. I can go home right now. So thank you all for that. I will say that it is nice always to come back to Bethel College. So many familiar faces. My friend Dale Schrag is here somewhere. There's Dale. And I used to pick on Dale, but the first time I think I spoke here, Dale introduced me, brought me in, and I told the group that Dale changed my life. And everyone went, oh. And I said, before I met Dale, I was happy. Tonight, I am going to focus my wrath on Shell, who is making me follow my hero. He really is my hero. He was so encouraging. He would stop by the Eagle newsroom when I was trying to learn how to do a column 2 or 3 times a week. And he was just so helpful and so generous. And later, when I became a trustee at the KU School of Journalism, the School of Journalism gave Leonard its highest award. I'll never forget his speech. He talked about how societies arrive at truth. And he says, we arrive at truth by stacking fact on top of fact on top of fact. And then at a certain point, we arrive at truth. And what has happened in our society is that different groups of people have their own stack of truths and their own stack of facts. And the segmentation of media has kind of pulled us apart. So he's brilliant, and thank you all sincerely for that. I'm really humbled by that. I mean, sincerely, people say that all the time, but I'm really humbled now. I want to thank Lindsay for her introduction. Too many papers. I also want to thank Dean Milliman. Thank you for your kind words. Dan, KIPCOR, Cheryl, again, I know I was picking on you, but why do we tease? Because we love. You all are thanking me, but I kind of feel like I ought to pay you for being here. I'm not, but thank you for being here. This is a difficult subject. It's a difficult subject for me personally. So I'll be asking for you to send me some positive energy from wherever you're watching tonight. It's difficult, but it's really important. And there may not have been a more suitable time in my life for us to talk about peace and how important it is. And I'm talking tonight about peace being a choice. You know, the jungle creed is that predators feed on any prey they can. And I was branded beast at every feast before I ever became a man. I went to college with an incredible guy from Chicago named Byron. Byron is a warm and talented person, and his mother sent him to Kansas to save him from the streets, to save his life, frankly. My roommate, Corey, another incredible person, went home to Chicago with Byron, and as was Corey's way, he came back with this powerful observation. Corey said as they rode through Byron's neighborhood, he saw grown men maybe in their 30s and 40s, pedaling bicycles and wearing NBA jerseys. They'd orbit the basketball courts, the street corners, the liquor stores, wherever people gathered. Corey said he also saw teenage boys iced up in blinding diamond earrings, necklaces, watches, and driving luxury cars. These youngsters cruised the block, nodding occasionally at people who passed. And then sometimes they would dip their hand into their pocket, peel off a couple of bills for the men on the bicycles. And Corey said this inversion of roles stunned him. It stunned me too. And then I started seeing it where I lived. It made me wonder what we had done as a society to our children. And I'm not talking just about the children who were trapped in the hood. I'm talking about the ones who were raised in affluent suburbs, who stockpile weapons and descend murderously on our schools. What exactly have we created? In Wichita recently, 3 students were shot across the street from their high school. In Kentucky, a boy was recently murdered at his bus stop. And just last week, a 17-year-old boy mysteriously died in police custody following his arrest. We've made choices, a series of them, and those choices has helped shape the children that we see today. People say that criminality, for example, is not a choice, but survival. I'd argue, however, that for some, survival means making different choices when society limits your options. The choices our children are making are embodied in my opening words that I borrowed from Iceberg Slim. You know, the jungle creed is that predators feed on any prey they can. And I was branded beast at every feast before I ever became a man. Do we want warm, caring, feeling people, or cold, selfish predators? We've made our choice, it seems, but those choices need not be our final decision. Any achievement begins with a choice. We also need to understand clearly what we're up against. We have to, in Kansas Leadership Center parlance, stay in diagnosis long enough to fully comprehend the depth and the breadth of what we want to change. And to that end, I'm suggesting that before we choose, we must consider a broader definition of violence, and then consider the degree to which that violence has become a choice in our culture, one that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, one we pass on to our children, and that our children then pass on to their children. Without a broader definition of violence, we won't excise all of the diseased tissue, and those diseased cells we leave behind simply will start multiplying again when we close the wound. The violence around us continues to change us in frightening ways. I can remember standing in the Springfield News Leader newsroom in December of 2012 when word came that a school shooting in Sandy Hook had claimed the lives of 20 first graders. Amid the heartbreak of the moment, many of us, if not most of us, quietly hoped that maybe now our society would get serious about sensible gun control measures. But sadly, wide swaths of our country decided instead that it could live with murdered 6-year-olds, if that's what it took for them to be able to keep their guns. Years before, a child stumbled into the scene of a quadruple homicide in Wichita and numbly and nimbly tiptoed through the gore to unhook a video game. And for the sake of context here, a police officer who later stumbled onto that scene ran outside and vomited. And we wondered back in the newsroom how a child could see this and not react. So we drew a mile circle around his home and we reviewed a 5-year compilation of violent crime data inside that zone. And that little boy had seen more than his share of violence, and his neighborhood also had many times the city average of liquor stores, but that's a different speech. When former Surgeon General David Satcher visited Wichita, I shared that story with him, and he asked if we could mail him a copy of that story. Violent crime, he said, had become a public health emergency. Think about how our public discourse in this nation, by this nation's defining generation, the baby boomers, seem to see the world in terms of war. The war on poverty, the war on hunger, the war on drugs. Our language, even in expressions of solutions, seems to take a violent turn. But I'm asking all of you tonight to consider a new way of viewing violence. Can't violence take different forms? If something hurts or harms, isn't that violence also? Can an economy, for example, act cruelly, even violently? You know, our society is a capitalist society. I happen to think that capitalism needs guardrails, but this is the system that we have. It has given us unimaginable wealth and unequal opportunity. But I've come to understand that so much of what this economy boils down to is business owners saying to workers, how am I going to make a profit unless I can exploit you? When I spoke at Bethel's graduation ceremony years and years ago, I shared this passage from Marshall Frady's book, Jesse, The Life and Pilgrimage of Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson was describing working conditions at a North Carolina chicken processing plant where 25 people died in a fire. These are his words from his speech. Imperial Foods ran away from the North in unions that kept filing objections to doors locked from the outside. They moved their plant to the New South, to a non-union workforce, black and white. 11 years, not one inspection. The workers, mostly women, making $4.25 an hour, no health insurance. Then a fire. Doors locked on the outside by managers afraid some worker might steal a chicken. 25 killed, 70 injured. Women, mostly women who have only 2 5-minute breaks a day to use the bathroom. Women who work on those lines until their hands freeze. And they don't even realize at first that they've lost a finger. One of them told me she was crying. So glad somebody came to our town. I really don't want to be on welfare. They make us pluck 100 chicken wings a minute, and then we get that carpal thing in our hands and in our wrists, and we can't bend them. And then they fire us. We can't address our grievances anymore, and we can't get any more jobs because if we talk back, they blackball us. We can't work anyway because our hands and our wrists hurt. And then they put us on welfare, and they call us lazy. Isn't that a form of violence? Years ago, I met Father Greg Boyle. He's the founder of the world's largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-injury program. It's called Homeboy Industries, and it's based in Los Angeles. Father Boyle convinced me that we did, in fact, need a broader definition of violence. What Father Boyle so powerfully imprinted on me was how the withholding of resources fell on a continuum of violence. Father Boyle worked with gangs, but said that our so-called civil society resembled gang life far more than we would care to admit. Violence, he said, doesn't just appear. Like fire, it has ingredients. Knowingly and intentionally starving people of the health care they need, he said, was one of the ingredients, for example, of gang violence. Father Boyle said he had never met a gang member who wasn't depressed, traumatized, mentally ill, or some combination. Most needed treatment, but they only received incarceration. He told a bittersweet story when he visited about two young men, one named Puppet, one named Youngster. They worked with him in his program, and he made them work together, which was no small feat because they hailed from rival gangs. And each had said tersely at first, I'll work with him, but I won't talk to him. But since demonizing people you see daily is difficult, the relationship eventually warmed. But one night, a rival gang jumped Puppet, and they continued kicking him in the head long after he had fallen motionless. Boyle said that he had seen many horrors over the years in his work with gangs, but none quite like Puppet laying in a hospital bed with his head monstrously swollen from the beating. Puppet had no brain activity, and he lingered on life support for about 48 hours. His circle of loved ones had begun filtering in to say their goodbyes, and now Youngster was in that circle. He called Boyle before Puppet died. He was offering his help. He said he would even give his blood to help his friend. He was my friend, Boyle recalled Youngster saying softly on the other end of the phone. Now you might balk at any comparison to gang violence, but violence can begin in one form and morph into another. I'm saying that stopping the violence will entail more than gun bans and background checks. We have to address the full continuum of violence, which means stopping economic violence, stopping economic exclusion, and stopping economic injustice. Specifically, we must stop denying people the help they need to survive and recognize that the impulse to deny people what they need is every bit as vicious as the back alley beatdown that killed Puppet. We have to find the courage, as Father Boyle did, to be impatient with justice, but patient with people. 10 years ago, last January, I stood on this campus and shared for the first time a similar message about choices. Now, I had shared with Cheryl earlier that I try to make every speech fresh and original, but in this case, I don't think I'd ever produce a more effective word on peace. I've tried to share this speech somewhere once a year, typically in celebration of Dr. King's holiday, and not once have I managed to make it through to the last sentence without some paralysis and some tears. So please pray for me as I share passages from this speech that I entitled, A Choice of Weapons. In his book, the great photographer and writer, filmmaker Gordon Parks tells a story of choosing to respond to the violence and the hate that he experienced here in Kansas as a child with a camera, with a typewriter, and with a brilliantly creative mind. This is what Mr. Parks wrote. Even at 16, I was aware of the problems I faced, and quickly enough, tried thinking about ways to survive. I would not go back to my sisters, and the distance back to Kansas was insurmountable. I never thought of the Salvation Army or some other charity, yet there were other things that I considered, and one of those things was robbery. I came closest the morning of my 17th birthday when I found myself alone on the trolley with an elderly conductor. He poked me awake and stood there just above me, holding a bundle of bills wadded together in a rubber band. And at the side of those bills, my hand tightened about the switchblade in my pocket. I rose slowly, looking around to see who was about. We were alone. The operator had already gone to the cafe across the street. The conductor turned away from me and walked toward the rear of the car. Perspiration rolled from my armpits, and my anxiety must have shown on my face. I pressed the button, and the long blade popped out. "Conductor!" "Yes?" He turned and stared calmly at the blade. I looked back at him, trembling now, with all of my mother's warnings coming hot at me. "Conductor," I said, "would you give me $1 for this knife? I'm hungry and I don't have a place to stay." He continued to watch me for another moment. "You can keep the knife," he said. "Come over to the cafe and I'll buy you a meal." Still shaking and now not knowing what to do, I closed the blade. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's all right," he said, peeling off 2 $1 bills. "Go where you want. Get some grub." "It's okay, I can manage." But he insisted, "Take it. Take it and keep yourself out of trouble." But I refused the money. I jumped out of the car and hurried away, more ashamed than I'd ever been in my life. I offer that moment from Mr. Park's youth as an example of how violence is often instinctual, a reaction, while peace is a choice, a courageous choice, a personal choice. And while it might sound tragic, this is not a story of violence, it is a story of peace. And though it may sound heartbreaking, this is not a story of woe. And though it may sound like divine providence, this is a story about a choice of weapons. Before my cousin Ricardo lost his son Robert to one of the most bizarre acts of random violence Wichita had seen in years, Ricardo was celebrated. He was an assistant basketball coach at Wichita Southeast High School, and he had just watched his team win a city league title. The win that night was particularly satisfying because that evening, he'd watched this group of boys gel into a coolly efficient team. And after a boisterous locker room celebration, Ricardo was heading to a celebratory dinner when he got the call. The voice was hysterical, almost incoherent in its panic. "Robert's been shot. Robert's been shot. You have to come to the hospital." Robert had actually cheered on his dad from the stands that night and was dropping off some friends after the game when he stopped at a traffic light. A young man in a car next to Robert's, a young man we'd later learned was high and drunk and who wouldn't even remember the shooting, didn't like the way Robert looked at him. So he pulled out a gun and began firing at Robert's car. Bullets tore through Robert's elbow and through his neck. Clutching at his wounds and still trying to drive, Robert drove less than a block before jumping the curb in a residential area very close to Wesley Hospital, and one of his friends in the car drove the rest of the way, but Robert died before Ricardo could get there. This case stunned the city. Hundreds of people filled St. Mark United Methodist Church for Robert's funeral. The attention spoke to the kind of kid Robert was, and to the fear such a wild, random shooting had stoked in the larger community. That attention extended to the trial and into the sentencing, where my cousin came face to face with the child who had killed his child. He said he immediately began thinking about the similarities between the young man and Robert. Each was someone's son or grandson. What had happened was the focus of great pain in each family. With the love and concern Robert had received, perhaps Robert's killer may have taken a different path. Since that tragedy, my cousin has crisscrossed the country, sharing his story of pain and encouraging young men tempted by gangs and tempted by the streets to take a different path. And I've seen him with them. The same boys who couldn't seem to sit still long enough for a teacher to tell them anything sat transfixed by his story. And they weren't just listening. I've watched their faces. They were learning in the purest sense. They were taking in the story, injecting their own understanding, mixing in their own life experiences, processing it, and then returning quickly to Ricardo's next word. They weren't just receiving a story, they were active participant listeners. The great scholar and public intellectual Cornel West says truth cannot surface until suffering is allowed to speak. And suffering had spoken to Ricardo and to our family in such painful and vulnerable eloquence. Ricardo met Robert when Robert was a toddler, and Ricardo began dating Robert's mother, Rosalind. He lured Robert to him with a potato chip, and the baby made himself comfortable on Ricardo's lap. Before he left, Ricardo held the child out in front of him and smiled. Robert smiled back, grabbed his face with his chubby little hands, and kissed Ricardo on the nose. This was who Ricardo was rushing to the hospital to see. Shortly after his arrival, he and other family were ushered into what the hospital ironically calls the quiet room. This is the place where doctors and police deliver to families the worst possible news. It is the place where the screaming begins, as it did that night. As the doctor emerged with police department officials present, they explained that Ricardo and Rosalind could not see their son because they considered his body a crime scene. The fact that they would not see their son until his funeral made the entire scene and his death seem that much more surreal. Ricardo said his eyes swept the room, from the face of his wife and the face of his mother-in-law. They were screaming to the face of the doctor, to the police officials, and then into his own hands. It is unlikely, God willing, that none of us here tonight will experience precisely what he experienced. But it is likely that we will all have choices of our own to make. Moments when our suffering begins to speak and the truth of who we are begins to surface. And we can choose. We can choose, so we must choose our weapons wisely. Are we going to choose brute force, or as Dr. King recommended, soul force? Guns or grace? Hate or heart? My cousin chose correctly and compassionately after experiencing the unimaginable. And if he could do that, the rest of us have no excuse. But that hasn't stopped us from making excuses. Dr. King told Ebony Magazine back in March of 1965 that world peace through nonviolent means is neither absurd nor unattainable. All other methods have failed. Thus, we must begin anew. Writing this speech and thinking, I wondered if maybe in the same way that babies scream because they can't communicate in any other way, that the rest of us engage in various forms of violence because we need something and we don't know how to communicate in any other way. There's a school shooting, what do we recommend? Guns for teachers. A church or synagogue shooting? Guns at the prayer service. A caravan of starving, frightened people moving toward our border? Let's send military. Street violence? Stand your ground laws. It's not that guns are our reality, it's that guns are our identity. I remember feeling at one time that violence seemed so foreign, so distant, so remote. I didn't realize until much later that it was familiar and proximate and adjacent to everything. We inhale it. We absorb it. We eat it at every meal. And if we are what we eat, what does our heavy diet of violence make us? In a nation where war is pastime and violence is entertainment, and parents at Board of Education meetings tell board members, "We know where you live." What is this doing to us? Deep down, I think we know the answer. We can see the answer in the inverted social structures that Corey saw when he went home to Chicago with Byron. It is present in the fact that we have recorded so many school shootings that we've lost count, and we can't remember the specifics of the last one. We've created a society better suited to predators than to people. Branded beast at every feast before I ever became a man. If you treat people like beasts, that's what you're going to get. Peace is a choice, my friends, and the choice is yours. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. We are, I know that many of us are just reeling from some of the things that you shared, and you're right, just the emotion that welled up in me, just hearing that story about your cousin and the family. I cannot imagine. I know that we want to take this time to get those of you who are in the room. You may have some questions. We're going to begin a question and answer session now. And we also probably have folks who are coming in through our live stream who may have questions. And Dan and Eva, if you want to stand, we'll go ahead and plan for those folks who are live streaming in. If you have questions, you may put them in the chat, and we will have an opportunity for those questions to be asked to Mark, and he'll be able to respond. We're trying to have a little bit of technical difficulty with this microphone, but as soon as we can get it up and going or figure out what to do, we will have folks who are in the room. You can come on this side of the room, and we will go ahead and hear your questions on this side of the room. Neither of them are working? Do we have any questions from the chat yet? Are there folks in the room who have questions for Mark?
I think I answered all the questions.
Sure. I think people may have questions and they just need a moment. But There were so many references you made to people I've gotten the opportunity to connect with, and you know, one of the things that kind of struck me as you were talking about Father Boyle, who I've had the opportunity to meet, the area that the connection that I have with Father Boyle was through his restorative justice work and the way he talks about restorative justice. And I just wondered for you, although you didn't talk about it specifically naming it that, are there ways that you see in terms of how you talk about harm and possibly ways to repair harm? Does restorative justice enter your vernacular, and do you have some ways of talking about that in your work, and if you could share that?
I think that's fundamental. It's the predicate of everything that I said. I'm sorry.
Just so everybody on the screen here. Just wanted you to repeat the question.
I'm not sure I can repeat it as well as you asked it, but she was asking about restorative justice and to what degree does restorative justice play a role in what I was talking about tonight. And I was saying that it was the predicate of everything that I said. That our debate now, for example, about critical race theory, which is not taught in K through 12 schools. It's my understanding from the lawyers that I work with at the ACLU that it has tended to be something taught in law school or in graduate school. But this fear that people have about discussing our ugly racial past has a lot to do with what you're talking about, Cheryl. That our inability to forthrightly address what happened and what is continuing to happen creates this environment of injustice that I was talking about. And a happy, well-adjusted society has done the appropriate work to deal with those kinds of injustices and dealing with those harms. There's something about who we are as Americans, I think, that makes us think that truth and reconciliation kinds of events that Canada is doing, that South Africa has done, project weakness. And we keep painting over mold, and you can't just paint over it. Sometimes you gotta take that whole wall out. And our seeming inability and unwillingness to do that is why we have the kind of society, at least in part, that we have. I was talking about needing to address injustice. The way we address injustice is partly what you're describing.
Thank you.
I'll try it this way since our microphone over there is not working. C. Stephen Anderson in our virtual audience asks, could you ask Mark to expound on the idea that capitalism is violent? How can we build an economic system that is based on humanity?
In the interest of full disclosure, that's Corey from my speech. And he was asking, what again, please? I'm sorry. I was so excited to hear that.
Expound on the idea that capitalism is violent, and how can we build an economic system based on humanity?
I tried to answer that in the context of the speech, where capitalism needs guardrails. It can't just be unfettered. We can't have situations like the scene that I described from the Jesse Jackson book, where we're forcing people to work for low wages in horrible conditions. Like those poor women, $4.25 an hour, no inspections, no union representation, doors locked on the outside because someone thought someone might steal a chicken. I hate to sound repetitive, but if we don't start addressing the systematic injustice that people are experiencing yet today, we're going to have a society where we're at each other's throats in the way that we are now. And the concern for me is that it's not enough to address it now. If we addressed it now, we've already taught a generation of children how to behave this way. So we have to project decades and decades into the future and find ways to make sure that people's dignity, their dignity is respected. That's the best way to do it. But I will say to my roommate, if I knew the answer to that, I'd probably have a better job than I have. But I appreciate the question, and I appreciate him.
Mark, I hesitate to ask this question because I think it simply asking the question may contribute to the exacerbation of the polarity that our society is already experiencing. But in the past 5 years, I have thought repeatedly about the 1516 publication of Erasmus called The Education of the Christian Prince, in which he makes the comment that one of the stubborn truths of history is that a society always will reflect the morality of its leader. So if your leader is an adulterer, you're going to see a rise in adultery. If your leader is a gambler, you're going to see a rise in gambling. If your leader is a bully, you're going to see a rise in bullying. I don't know if you want to comment on it because, anyway.
It's an interesting theory, Dale. Thank you for the question.
Well, it's from Erasmus, so it's clearly true.
So, what that makes me think about, Dale, is the morning after Barack Obama was elected. I'd been up till like 1 or 2 the night before, and I came in pretty early, and already my voicemail was full. One of the first calls, and forgive the language here, one of the calls was someone who was working at a fast food restaurant, and all morning people had been coming through the drive-thru, white people coming through the drive-thru, saying that they didn't want any niggers touching their food or their money. The little girl at the window had to be sent home. She was just in tears. Another call, a teacher who said that for 10 years, she had had lunch with the same group of teachers, and that day, they left without her. Next call, a grandmother who said her grandchild came home in tears. Her playmates said they would not play with her because now we have a black president. from most accounts, President Obama was an upstanding person. I also think his presidency unleashed what then produced President Trump. Which would make me then kind of question the premise from Erasmus. Because the former president, Trump, rode to prominence on a decidedly racist narrative that President Obama was not a citizen. And there was something he understood about a certain strain of American citizenship. And it was something that, if you remember, Senator McCain tried to put a lid on. And I just, it's there and it's always been there. It's always annoyed me when people say, well, that's not who we are. It is part of who we are. It's not all of who we are. It's certainly a part of it. And even today, I just wonder where the threshold is for holding him accountable for things that he has done. There doesn't seem to be a threshold for it. And I wish I had a better answer for that, but it just seems that there's a solid maybe 20-25% of people in the country who have some awful beliefs and an awful belief system. I appreciate your question.
Mark, my friend, we have known each other for a long time. We've had many conversations. We've known each other in your capacity, various professional capacities, and as friends. And I guess the reason I want to speak now is that as well as we knew each other, as many conversations as we've had together, when we were teaching in Bosnia and asked you to speak to our classes virtually about, they were reading your book, which is on sale over your site, plug, a wonderful book. But when you were speaking to the classes, things came out that were happening in your life that completely bowled me over. It's like when you tell about Ricardo's experience. I think there are many people of goodwill who have not the faintest idea what it's like to be a mother or a father of a young black man in this country today, to drive home into your neighborhood and have the police follow you, to have them, when you get out, to open your garage door, accost you. There's so many details of this that it's like when they're happening to you, it is painful, and it's kind of I imagine there's a question, should I even share these? I mean, will people believe it that it's happening to me? And I guess I want to say to everybody who's here, it's real, and to ask you to maybe say a little bit more. I watched an opera that was premiered at the University of Kansas, I believe, this past spring. It's called DWB, Driving While Black, and it's 45 minutes of a mother looking at her child as a baby. It's just 45 minutes walking you through this mother's life, a black mother and her child. And just fragments, just like we would take photographs of our children as they grow up. And I wondered if you could say more, if there's anything else that you feel on your heart to say that we need to know. We need to really see what's real, what happens in the school system or in the private schools. What did your kids face?
Gosh, I wouldn't know where to start.
I know.
It's really difficult. When Trayvon Martin was killed, I remember looking at the picture of him, and my oldest son had that shirt. And from the moment I heard about what happened to him, it was just arresting. The story I shared about my cousin, I also thought about my oldest son, because I met him about the same time that he met his son. They're about the same age. When I was 15, I was on a bicycle. I just rode over to a friend's house. Didn't even put my shoes on. And I was coming back, and a police officer pulled up behind me in a cruiser, lights on, gets on the speaker, and tells me to put my hands on my head and straddle the bike. And I'm immediately thinking two things. One, I'm right here at my house. Maybe he'll let me go. And two, my neighbors are starting to come out on the porch. And I just remember feeling like my face was like this clenched fist. I was so embarrassed, not for me, but for my mother, who didn't deserve what people must have been thinking. She didn't do a good job raising me or whatever. But the police officer wouldn't let me move my bike any longer. He lifted me off the bike by my neck. He put the handcuffs on me really tight. I just remember them slicing my wrists. And about that time I was being put in the car. We had a friend visiting. He came out of the front door of my house, and I yelled to him, tell my mother I'm being arrested. So they took me around the corner to this fast food place that had been robbed. And when I walked in, I remember the lady behind the counter bursting into tears. And I was thinking to myself, is she about to identify me as the robber? But it wasn't that. She was very upset with the police officer. She was crying at this point. She said, I told you, the person that threatened me with that knife was in his 30s. Why did you bring this child out? And I was so relieved. So while this was happening, my friend is at home, our family friend was telling my mother that I had been arrested. She's frantic. She jumps in the car, and about the time that the police officer and I are leaving the parking lot and he's taking me home, my mother is pulling up in the parking lot. She walks in, she says, where's my son? And they tell her, we don't know, the police just took him. She just explodes with emotion. I have 4 sons. It was hard to breathe when they left home without me. I didn't even want them to go to McDonald's or to the gym. It's just hard to breathe until they get back home. My oldest son's in the Navy, very proud of him. My middle son is 19, and I drive him everywhere. And I think he likes it. He's not in a hurry to drive, but he likes the fact that I drive him everywhere. But I drive him everywhere because I can't lay there in the bed wondering where he is and if he's safe. And I'm more afraid of him being stopped and pulled over and shot. It's unimaginable what African American parents deal with on a daily basis. As I mentioned in the speech, there was a 17-year-old taken into custody. He died in custody. We don't know how he died. A 17-year-old. My twins are 17. I've always held out hope that if white Americans of goodwill just had a whiff of what it was like, they wouldn't want it to happen to anyone else. That's the hope that I've always held out in my columns. We just need people to listen, to your point, Gretchen. Just need people to listen and understand that this is very real. This is something that we live with. And we won't be better as a country until we come to grips with it and confront it. I hope I answered your question.
You get both of us. I'm not sure I can do it out. But, Mark, I just, first of all, just thank you. I know every time it puts a star somewhere. So thank you for having courage. And I can't say we're going to get it, which makes me really sad and angry. So I can't offer any guarantees. I wish I could. I wish I could. I mean, I buried a lot of kids in the near Northeast, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, shot randomly or shot on purpose and gang stuff. And I just tried to change. I tried to change more things, people's minds and attitudes. And, we'll keep working with it. But discovering we're up against a much larger monolith than I previously thought. And a large part of that realization came on January 6th. And the day after January 6th, I saw a headline that said, the Confederacy finally got what they wanted, the Capitol. The Civil War is not over. I mean, things are still happening. It began in 1619. So I want to ask a question. How do you respond to Confederacy finally got what they wanted, the Capitol? That's my question.
So I had a really good friend. He has since passed away. His name is Phil Blake. And Phil Blake was kind of the keeper of military memorials in Wichita. I got to know him because we had in Wichita at the time a Veterans Memorial Park that included a Confederate flag. And I remember writing a column about how strange that was, in particular for Kansas, where our narrative as a state is free state. opposite of what in fact, a lot of people believe the Civil War really began here in Bleeding, Kansas. There's a high school in Lawrence called Free State. And what Phil wanted to do, he had confided in me this, and then I'd left the paper at that point, but I wrote a story about Phil for Wichita Magazine. And he had this idea for a reconciliation memorial. And he was arguing that we have forgiven all of our enemies that we've had wars with, except us. We're still fighting the Civil War in so many ways. The voting patterns seem to follow the old Confederacy and the new West, and how these new states in the West were going to enter the Union really touched off the war, right? That was a wonderful idea. It's going to have an obelisk with 5 sides, and it was going to honor black soldiers, it's going to honor Confederate soldiers, it's going to honor Union soldiers, and have a word from Abraham Lincoln. And he felt sincerely that the nation needed this. Not just Kansas, but like the nation needed a reconciliation memorial. That was a wonderful idea. Well, Phil passed away. And he left this project in the hands of people who, for whatever reason, did not include the black soldiers in the memorial. And when this issue resurfaced, I attended a park board meeting. This was the most raucous, near-violent public meeting I had ever attended. People were shooting expletives at each other. They were talking about meeting each other outside. It was like this kind of racial tension that you might only see in a movie. And there were people in there who identified more with the Confederacy than they did with the Union. And my answer to your question, I wanted to share a little bit about Phil, but I mean, our history is clear. There was nothing noble about the Confederacy. If you read Alexander Stevens' cornerstone speech, Alexander Stevens was the vice president of the Confederacy. He said that this new nation was built on the idea that the Negro is inferior, and he's in his natural, God-ordained place as a slave, as where he was. And we have to get beyond what I call let me say it this way. People love nostalgia. They hate history. And everything about this Confederate narrative is nostalgia. And it's as thin as paper. And it's as clear as day. And when you ask them what the war was about, and they say, well, it wasn't about slavery. It's about states' rights. My rejoinder is, yeah, the state's right to rape, to kill, to own human beings. And we have to get beyond this nostalgia. It seems to me that's really what's behind the opposition to teaching some honest history, where you put an event at the center and then you tell it from different perspectives, as opposed to putting one group's perspective forward as history. That's what we're going to have to do. That's part of the reckoning. That's part of the healing that Cheryl's been talking about. I think that's why people are fighting so hard to keep this history hidden. Because I know a lot of people don't like him, but I love Taylor Branch, the historian. And he talked about this narrative as a grand circle of fear. We're just in a circle shooting at each other. And it is imprisoned everyone. It imprisons the people who believe this nostalgia, and it imprisons the people still suffering from those ideas. And I have a sense that there are people who fear the kind of liberation that would come from the real accounting of history and what it would mean to people in authority and the people that we relegate to second-class status. I think that's the most important thing we could be doing right now. And really, that was why I love my job at the museum so much. It was about that. I remember asking if that Confederate flag could be brought to the Kansas African American Museum, and then we would display it. I don't think it should be destroyed, but it should be explained in proper context and not about nostalgia. So, thank you for that question.
Probably, okay, there's.
I have two questions, or one is not a question, but see how you would respond. In the last number of years, I think we have been seeing more African Americans on television in one capacity or another. Some there can be the host, and sometimes they're advertising some product. And I have felt good about that. Just how do the other African Americans feel about it? What do you think that they would feel about seeing more African Americans on TV as being part of the totality of the American scene? Or is it just my brain? Because I am very embarrassed and ashamed of American history. The first thing for the Native American Indians, and then making Africans into slaves. So I'm pleased to see that. Or am I just, is it just?
Well, I would say that the context matters. I know this is a popular person, but if the only depictions we get are the kind of depictions we get in a Tyler Perry movie, I can do without that. If they are historically accurate or they project some aspect of African and African American culture that don't diminish people or make fun of them, we could use more of that. It's just that, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that when an African American appeared on TV, the adults in the household would wave us in, and we would like all sit down and watch it. Because it was such a big deal. And anymore, there are certain choices that certain actors and actresses make that I feel like are demeaning. And maybe we should just pass on that role. But I do also understand that people have to work, and that's their vocation. But to your question, I think it's generally a positive. But then I'm always concerned about how people are being portrayed. To what degree are we endorsing a narrative or a nostalgia that is hurtful or harmful? Am I making any sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, when I was a little, one of the this sort of, these programs that would come on between the cartoons on Saturday morning. It's called Schoolhouse Rock. And when I was little, my mother felt like I looked like the Verb Kid. And she just thought it was wonderful that there was a child that looked like me, portrayed so lovingly. Like at the end, he runs to her and they embrace. And then there's like a heart around him that closes. And she just thought that was so wonderful. And she was in love with the little kid, Gary Coleman, on Different Strokes. And she loved Emmanuel Lewis and Webster. She just loved that. I mean, my mother was born in 1928. So you can imagine the kinds of images that she grew up seeing of our people. And then to have those kinds of images. It's important. One of the reasons I got into journalism was I had a professor who said, you have to be at the table. You don't want other people making decisions about how you portray or defining truth for you. That's what Sam Adams taught me. So I do think that's important. But we have to be discerning.
And then now one much more related to home, Bethel College campus. I'm sure that everybody here knows Bethel College history, and we have a good number of students from other states, and a great number of them are athletes, and they're African American citizens of the United States. Now, as we would gather one place or another, at an athletic event, or at a music event, or a theater event on campus, or in the cafeteria, or in the administration building, and there are some, should we, European ancestry Americans, should we make a special point to greet them and see them, and much more than we would to another Native American not Native American, European American, or not? Are we going out of the way to say hello, and where are you from, and what's your name? How have you found Bethel College?
That's an interesting question. I think people just want to feel welcome. I'd say that first. I was watching, I used to watch Real Time with Bill Maher. It's like a talk show on Friday nights. And he went on this rant a week or two ago about black students segregating themselves. And I remember agreeing with him on a lot of his essays at the end of the show. But I never, until that one, felt like what he had said was stupid. Segregation is imposed on people. If people want to affiliate with people who they feel more comfortable with, I don't consider that segregation. And it's typically a reaction to how they are treated on the campus. It's usually an indication that the campus isn't particularly warm. I was sharing with someone earlier that I used to cover religion for the Louisville Courier-Journal. And I met a professor at one of the seminaries who specialized in church warmth. And what he was talking about was that the optimal membership of a church, for it to be really warm and inviting, was about 700 people. After 700 people, it starts to cool off. And people start feeling not quite as welcome or not quite as connected. And so what a lot of the people who started megachurches figured out was you just keep people in these small groups, and then you make the small groups interact, and it warms up the church. Well, I think the same is true for a college campus. You have to start examining how warm the campus is for students of color, and maybe not treating them, going out of your way to ask them who they are and where they are, but relationships are relationships. Relationships are important. They can't be superficial. College campuses, any institution, really needs to be looking at the degree to which people feel comfortable, feel like they're really a part. Like one of my issues with diversity and inclusion is the inclusion part. The inclusion means I'm including you. I have the power. I'm the host. You'll always be the guest. I prefer the term belonging. But I hope I'm answering your question. I don't want to ramble too long.
Thank you.
I think we've definitely had some great questions, and Mark, thank you for being so generous with your responses. Once again, I just want to thank Mark. We're so grateful for the ways that you are so introspective about your lived experience, and just you are fond of knowledge about people you've met, interweaving history, and I've just been taking some notes about some of the things you've shared. I will hold on to that comment that you made about nostalgia and history, and just how important it is, what truth is and what it isn't. So with that, thank you once again, Mark McCormick. And we're going to have Dan come on up.
Promise I won't keep you long. I know a lot of you probably want to get going, but since I have a captive audience, many of you know about our KIPCOR film series. We've been doing that for decades, I believe, and I know many of you go, and so I just wanted to announce that our film series will continue on Sunday, November 14th at 2 p.m. Over in Crable Auditorium at the Fine Arts Center. We are back in person. We already had a film in September in person, and we're back with masks and social distancing. So Sunday, November 14th at 2 p.m., we'll be screening the documentary A Home Called Nebraska, which spotlights individuals who came to this country to escape war, torture, and persecution. And the film also focuses on our generous neighbors to the north in Nebraska, who welcomed them, taught them, and helped them find jobs and housing. So obviously this is a very timely film to see in light of the recent events such as the end of the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan and the refugees from that war who are now resettling in our country as we speak. So again, Sunday, November 14th, 2 p.m., Crable Auditorium. Please be sure to wear your mask, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
And you also please announce that Mark's books are here.
We are.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, I just want to say it has been a really wonderful night. I just wanted to encourage you as you are on your way out tonight. We will have a couple of folks in the back. I believe Christopher and Doug will be in the back. One of the things that I just want to convey is if you are pleased, which I think you are, with people like Mark coming to give peace lectures annually to KIPCOR, we can't do that without your support. Not only will your support help for peace lectures, but it would help for a lot of things that we are doing currently at KIPCOR in terms of the progress that we're making. What I would encourage you to do is on your way out, see Doug or see Christopher right over there. They have baskets. Thank you so much for considering donating to KIPCOR. So here's the hardest thing that I have to do, because it's always hard when you do things like this to remember every person who makes something happen. But truly, to do something like this is not an easy thing to do, especially given our current circumstances in COVID. So there are a lot of people that helped make this happen. First of all, I just want to thank the ways that we come together under the Bethel umbrella. Bethel College administration has been so supportive of the things we're doing at KIPCOR, and thank you so much, Bob Milliman, for being here representing administration, but not only as that person who is in that role, but Bob is one of the reasons why I'm here. Bob is the person I report to. He has given me so much support in allowing me to run KIPCOR in a way that honors the ways that it has been done for decades, but also to do some new things, and not just with lip service, but with his, Bob is a roll up your sleeves kind of person that has worked lockstep with me to help make change at KIPCOR, so I'm very, very grateful. So moving on, definitely cannot thank the faculty enough for their support in the ways that they have been consistently thinking about the ways that we can engage our students, and also KIPCOR students. While we know that in the next, tomorrow, Mark will get to engage in a classroom, and there will be some other students who will get the opportunity to meet with him and to hear more intimately from him about his journey. I also just want to thank people who are just coming, those of you who are coming from our surrounding Bethel community. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the ways that you hold up our banner outside of Bethel walls. I want to thank the communications staff at Bethel. Without the ways that they have been able to create our printed material, the posters that you've seen, the electronic copies that you've seen out there have been done by Erin Murphy. We so much appreciate her for the work that she does. I do want to back up and say thank you, Tricia Clark, for leading the communications team. We have just had such a great working relationship with the communications team due to her hard work. I also want to thank Melanie Zerker for a lot of her help around the editing process, around press releases, things that we need to promote our events. So grateful for her. Chase Dempsey, who is here tonight, he is the person who is doing our live stream and he is taking pictures. We're so grateful for your new energy that you're giving to us. He's new to Bethel, and what a treasure you are, Chase. Thank you so much. Taj, wherever you're in the back over here, thank you so much, Taj, did all of our technical support tonight. Thank you. Brad Schmidt, who coordinated we're part of a larger framework of events, the Fall Festival, the Fall Fest. And Brad and I spoke about moving the Peace Lecture as to be part of Fall Fest as an experiment to see, because we know that many folks come to the Bethel campus at this time of year. We wanted to be a part of that. And Brad was so supportive and gave us a lot of press through the promotion of the Fall Fest. So thank you, Brad. This is always the part that just warms my heart because I have such a dedicated, hardworking staff. And it's growing a little bit because we have, we got our first intern not from Bethel. That is a student at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And he has to do an internship with a peace building institute, and he chose KIPCOR. So we have Christopher Swanson as part of our team this year. So we're grateful for Christopher. He's just been a joy to have with us this year, and he's been doing a lot of work. He's going to be selling t-shirts over there shortly. And Lindsay Fonestill, who we're so grateful. This is our 3rd year with Lindsay. Lindsay has been our student worker and a hard-working, diligent one since she's gotten here her freshman year, so we still have you for 1 more year, and we're grateful for that. So thank you so much, and thank you for the ways that you came in and you did a wonderful welcome for tonight. Doug, thank you so much for all that you have done to help pull this together and the ways that you have helped us with all of the arrangements, all of the behind-the-scenes things that I could think of. Doug has done that, and Doug is not one that comes in front of the audience very frequently, but he does so much for KIPCOR as our office manager, so thank you. Dan, I appreciate so much the ways that you bring, Dan has a journalism background as well, and in many ways, I know that Dan was one of the very first people to support the idea of Mark coming as they have worked together in the past. And I also rely heavily on Dan in the ways that he helps to be part of the ways that we do announcing and the ways that he's able to help do some of the sifting through of the questions and things like that with his keen eye. But beyond that, it's been a great journey to have you as part of this, building this over the months. And hearing your ideas. We have a new staff person that just started in July, and you heard her up here a little bit ago, but Eva Lapp has just joined our staff as our new Director of Education and Training. So it's been wonderful to have a fresh voice, new energy come to KIPCOR, and thank you so much for all that you've added to tonight. So much appreciate that. She is not here tonight. I'm hoping you're watching the live stream. Kirsten Zerfer, over the past year and a half, has come back to work at KIPCOR. She had retired and had been a senior associate at KIPCOR for many months. But she stepped into the role of interim education and training director in the absence of someone being in that role over the past year and a half before Eva arrived. And Kirsten's voice has very much been a part of tonight. And so Kirsten, from where you are, thank you so much. I would be remiss if I did not thank my family who allow me to come here every day. I put in some long hours. So I'm not that person that goes home and cooks every night. And I have regrets about that. But I'm grateful for my family that empower me to come here and do what I do every day. My husband, Leroy, and I have my son, Colin, here, and just really, really grateful. So for tonight, once again, I thank you, Mark. It has been an honor and a privilege to have you here. From our family to yours, the words thank you, they're not adequate enough for coming here and being with us today and tomorrow. We hope and pray that this has been a wonderful experience for you, and we hope that we will continue to have you back. Thank you once again. Thank you everyone for being here. Yes, Mark's book is going to be sold over here. And so please, before you leave tonight, visit the book table. They'll be on sale and he'll be able to sign and greet you as you come through tonight. So please take some time to do that. We'll also have some KIPCOR shirts for sale and we have a few refreshments for you over here. So with that, I thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And again, it is so wonderful to have you be physically present with us. It's been a gift. So take good care, and until we meet again, thank you so much. Good night.